Imagine waking up one morning to find a wall cutting straight through your city. Streets blocked overnight, train lines severed, families separated without warning, friends suddenly living in different countries, unable to visit each other again. In August 1961, this is exactly what happened in Berlin. What began as barbed wire and concrete would become one of the most powerful symbols of division in modern history. The Berlin Wall did not just split a city. It reshaped Europe, defined the Cold War, and altered the lives of millions for nearly 3 decades. To understand why the Berlin Wall mattered so deeply, we must first understand how Berlin became the most dangerous fault line in the Cold War. After World War II ended in 1945, Germany was left devastated. Cities lay in ruins, infrastructure was destroyed, and the country's political future was uncertain. The victorious Allied powers agreed that Germany should be occupied and demilitarized to prevent another war. The country was divided into 4 occupation zones, controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Although Berlin lay deep within the Soviet-controlled zone, the city itself was also divided into 4 sectors. This unusual arrangement reflected both cooperation and deep mistrust among the former allies. At first, the division was meant to be temporary. But as relations between the Western powers and the Soviet Union deteriorated, Germany and Berlin became symbols of a much larger ideological struggle. The Western allies promoted democratic institutions, free markets, and economic recovery. With American support, West Germany experienced rapid rebuilding and rising living standards. In contrast, the Soviet Union established a communist government in its zone, emphasizing state control, political loyalty, and centralized planning. By 1949, these differences hardened into permanent division. 2 German states were created. The Federal Republic of Germany, known as West Germany, aligned with the United States and Western Europe. The German Democratic Republic, known as East Germany, became a communist state aligned with the Soviet Union. Berlin, however, remained a divided city with open borders between East and West. This made it a unique and dangerous pressure point in the Cold War. For East Germany, Berlin became a serious problem. While borders elsewhere were sealed with fences and guards, Berlin remained a gateway to the West. East Germans could legally travel into East Berlin and then cross into West Berlin, where they could seek refuge and begin new lives. The contrast between the 2 sides of the city was impossible to ignore. West Berlin enjoyed greater personal freedoms, access to consumer goods, and economic opportunity. East Berlin, like the rest of East Germany, was tightly controlled by the state. Surveillance was widespread, political dissent was punished, and travel was heavily restricted. Between 1949 and 1961, more than 2 million East Germans fled to the West, most through Berlin. Many were young, skilled, and educated. Doctors, engineers, scientists, and students left in large numbers. This mass exodus became known as a brain drain, and it threatened the economic stability and political legitimacy of East Germany. East German leaders feared collapse. The Soviet Union feared embarrassment. A socialist state that people were fleeing in such numbers exposed the weaknesses of the communist system. Something had to be done. On the night of August 13, 1961, East German authorities acted. Under the cover of darkness, soldiers and police rolled out barbed wire across Berlin's streets. Roads were blocked. Rail connections were cut. Concrete barriers followed soon after. Residents went to sleep in one city and woke up in 2 separate worlds. Families were divided overnight. Some people found themselves unable to return home from work. Others watched loved ones trapped on the opposite side. Windows overlooking the border were bricked up. Streets ended abruptly at walls. Cemeteries were split in half. What began as temporary fencing evolved into a massive fortification. Over time, the Berlin Wall became a complex system of concrete walls, fences, watchtowers, floodlights, guard dogs, anti-vehicle trenches, and a wide, death strip designed to prevent escape. The wall was not built to keep enemies out. It was built to keep citizens in. East German border guards were ordered to stop anyone attempting to cross. While official policy was often ambiguous, the reality was deadly. Many people were shot while trying to escape. Others were captured and imprisoned. Each failed attempt reinforced the wall's purpose: control through fear. Life in East Berlin and East Germany became increasingly constrained. The government monitored its citizens closely through an extensive surveillance network. Informants were common. Trust between neighbors eroded. Travel abroad was rare and heavily regulated. The wall became a constant physical and psychological presence, reminding people of their lack of freedom. In West Berlin, the wall created a different reality. The city became an isolated island of capitalism surrounded by communist territory. Its survival depended on the political will and military support of the United States and its allies. West Berliners lived with the knowledge that they were on the front line of a global standoff. Despite this, West Berlin became a symbol of resistance. Western leaders used the city to demonstrate their commitment to defending freedom. In 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy visited West Berlin and delivered a speech expressing solidarity with its people. His message was clear: the West would not abandon Berlin. The Berlin Wall quickly became one of the most recognizable symbols of the Cold War. It represented more than a border. It represented the division between two opposing systems, two visions of society, and two ways of life. On one side stood democratic governance and market economies. On the other stood centralized control and ideological conformity. The wall also exposed a powerful truth. A system that needed walls, guards, and guns to prevent its people from leaving struggled to claim moral legitimacy. Every escape attempt, successful or not, undermined communist propaganda. Despite the risks, people continued to try to escape. Some dug tunnels beneath the wall, spending months in secret. Others hid in modified vehicles or attempted daring crossings using hot air balloons, zip lines, or homemade aircraft. Each successful escape became international news, inspiring others and embarrassing the East German government. As the years passed, the wall appeared permanent. But beneath the surface, change was coming. By the late 1970s and 1980s, the Soviet Union faced deep economic stagnation. Maintaining control over Eastern Europe drained resources and energy. At the same time, exposure to Western media and ideas increased dissatisfaction among populations behind the Iron Curtain. When Mikhail Gorbachev became leader of the Soviet Union, he introduced reforms aimed at modernizing the system. Policies encouraging openness and restructuring reduced censorship and signaled a major shift in Soviet policy. Most importantly, the Soviet Union made it clear that it would no longer use military force to suppress change in Eastern Europe. This shift transformed the political landscape. Across Eastern Europe, protests grew. Governments that had relied on fear and Soviet backing suddenly found themselves vulnerable. In East Germany, citizens demanded the right to travel, freedom of expression, and political reform. Demonstrations grew larger and more frequent. The East German leadership struggled to respond. Attempts to maintain control through force risked international backlash and lacked Soviet support. Confusion and pressure mounted within the government. On November 9, 1989, a miscommunicated announcement changed history. An East German official stated that new travel regulations would allow citizens to cross the border freely, effective immediately. Border guards, lacking clear instructions, faced growing crowds demanding passage. Unable to control the situation, they opened the checkpoints. People flooded across the border. Families reunited. Strangers embraced. Crowds climbed onto the wall, celebrating and tearing it apart with their bare hands. After 28 years, the Berlin Wall had fallen. The fall of the wall sent shockwaves across Europe. Communist governments collapsed across Eastern Europe, often peacefully. The Cold War was effectively ending. Germany reunified in 1990, bringing together two societies shaped by decades of separation. Reunification was not easy. Economic inequality, social differences, and lingering mistrust remained. But the physical and symbolic division was gone. The Berlin Wall had changed Europe by turning ideological division into physical reality. Its construction hardened Cold War boundaries. Its fall signaled the collapse of those boundaries and the beginning of a new era. Today, fragments of the wall remain as memorials. They serve as reminders of division, fear, and resilience. They warn how quickly freedom can be restricted and how long it can take to restore. The Berlin Wall was never just about Berlin. It was about power, ideology, and control. It demonstrated how global struggles shape everyday lives and how ordinary people can ultimately bring historic change. Understanding how the Berlin Wall changed Europe helps explain the end of the Cold War, the reunification of Germany, and the political landscape of modern Europe. It remains one of the most important symbols of the 20th century, not because it was built, but because it was torn down.